The Fire Spirit. There is a small village on the way from Granada to Murcia, called Puralina, where the peasants used to dwell in caves and holes, which were dug out of the soft hillocks. The road is studded all along with crosses and memorials of desperate fights, drunken bouts, and quarrels about love matters. The village itself is so squalid that but very few of the wretched tenements which are used for sheltering people could be called houses. In them, however, live many persons who were only too thankful to have a place to hide themselves in, or to take refuge from the severe cold, which sometimes penetrates even to Murcia. In one of these forlorn and wretched huts lived a poor old woman named Cipriana, who was too far advanced in years to do very hard work, but who occasionally helped her neighbours for a bit of dinner, and took care of the babies of the village while their mothers worked in the fields. She had had a hard life. First she was in service, then a farmhand, then a tailor. At last she married a fascinating barber, who was the Figaro of Murcia. He was somewhat uncertain in his temper at home, though outside he was always the cheeriest and brightest of beings. There was nobody like Antonio for spreading the last scandal, or telling the best story in the whole country round, and he cut hair and shaved beards as though his instruments were made of satin. He was the favourite of all, and at last had a large practice in shaving and surgery, and especially in the use of cupping and leeches. But with his large practice he took to very dissipated habits, and began to spend like a prince. He took his wife with him sometimes when he travelled, but she was more often left behind than taken. In his absences she did the work at home, going as a barber to the different customers, and doing her work very well too. But the money came to an end at last, and Antonio never returned to his wretched wife. Although it was almost a blessing to get rid of him, as he had turned out to be the bane of her life, she grieved and mourned over him as if he had been the best of husbands. Time at last gave her peace, and she managed to live by barbering and tailoring in her native village of Puralina. When she grew older and more infirm, she took to doing odds and ends for her neighbours for a meal, and watching the tiny babies while their mothers were at work. It was in the night of the dead, and old Cipriana was sitting over her brasero, musing over her past life, and wondering why some should be so very poor and others so very rich, when a voice almost at her elbow said, "I can't answer that question, but I can tell you, good
Sample complete. Ready to continue?